My husband was planning to leave me. He had been planning it for months, carefully, quietly, the way he approached everything that mattered to him. He kept spreadsheets for holidays. He researched restaurants for 3 days before booking. When Daniel decided something, he was methodical about it. He did not act on impulse. He did not leave things to chance. So when he decided to leave our 12-year marriage, he planned that too. What he did not plan for was me. He did not plan for the woman I became in the 30 days between finding out about her pregnancy and the night I finally spoke. He did not plan for what silence looks like when it is not defeat, when it is strategy, patience, and a woman taking careful aim before she fires. He thought my silence meant I did not know. He thought my warmth meant I was safe. He thought my stillness meant I was sleeping. I was not sleeping. I was watching. I was documenting. I was building something in the quiet of those 30 days that would dismantle everything he thought he had protected. My name is Silva. I am 38 years old. And this is the story of the 30 days I said nothing and everything that happened when I finally did. We met when I was 26 at a work event neither of us wanted to attend. He made a dry comment about the canapes and I laughed before I could stop myself. That was the beginning of everything. We married 2 years later. Small wedding, our families, my sister Priya, a handful of friends who actually meant something. I wore my grandmother's earrings. He cried when I walked in, which he denied for years, and I loved him for both the crying and the denial. We bought a house that needed work and spent 3 years turning it into something that felt like us. We argued about cabinet colors. I wanted white, he wanted wood. We chose wood. We got a golden retriever named Archie who ate one shoe from every pair we owned and showed absolutely no remorse about it. We did not have children. Not by accident, but by conversation, years of returning to the question and reaching the same answer together. Our life was quieter than some and fuller than others. I ran an interior design business from a studio downtown. Daniel worked in corporate finance. Long hours, frequent travel. A phone that never fully went quiet even on weekends. The marriage was not perfect. No marriage is. But I loved him. Completely and without reservation. I want you to hold that fact for everything that comes next. About a year before everything broke open, Daniel started leaving his phone face down on the kitchen counter. Every single time. Without exception. It was a small thing. The kind of small thing you notice once, tell yourself means nothing, and then notice again. And again. Until noticing it becomes its own kind of knowledge, the kind your conscious mind refuses to process, but your body already understands. I did not check the phone. I want to be clear about that. I was not the kind of wife who checked. Not because I was naive. I think I understood exactly what it would mean to look. I was not ready for that yet. I was still choosing the life I had over the truth I suspected, and I want to be honest about that choice because I think more people make it than will admit to it. You love something long enough, and it becomes the air you breathe. You do not think about the air. You just breathe it. The idea of it not being there is not a thought you let yourself think too clearly or too long. So I let the phone stay face down. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I slept next to him in the dark and listened to him breathe and told myself that the smallness of that gesture meant nothing. I was very good at telling myself things. 3 weeks before the afternoon that changed everything, I found a hotel receipt in Daniel's jacket pocket. I was not looking for it. I was taking the jacket to the dry cleaner, one of 100 small domestic tasks I performed automatically, without credit, without thought. The receipt fell from the pocket when I checked it. One night. A hotel 2 hours away. A city Daniel had never once mentioned visiting for work. I stood in our hallway for a long moment. Archie sat at my feet and looked up at me with his enormous, guileless eyes. I did not call Daniel. I did not leave the receipt on the counter where he would see it and understand I had found it. I did not cry or scream or do any of the things you imagine you will do in a moment like this. I took a photograph of it on my phone, slid it back into the pocket, and hung the jacket by the door. Then I went to the kitchen and made dinner. I have thought many times about why I made that choice. The most honest answer is that something in me had already shifted quietly, without my permission, into a different mode. Not passive. Not afraid. Careful. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I responded to it. I needed facts, not feelings. A few days after the receipt, I brought Daniel lunch at his office. Something I did occasionally, not often enough to be predictable. He worked on the 4th floor of a glass building downtown where the central meeting room had a full wall of windows facing the corridor. I saw him before he saw me. He was in the meeting room with a colleague. A woman I recognized from the company Christmas party, Serena. 29. Relatively new to the London office. Daniel had mentioned her exactly once, in the careful, offhand way people mention someone they are trying not to seem interested in mentioning. They were not touching. They were not kissing. They were looking at something on a laptop screen together, and she said something, and he laughed. That was all. Just a laugh. But I knew that laugh. I had married that laugh. It was the private one, not the professional one he used with clients, but the unguarded one, the one that came from somewhere real. The one I heard in our kitchen on Sunday mornings and nowhere else. Or so I believed. I did not go in. I walked back to the lift, pressed the button, stood in the lobby until my breathing steadied. Then I drove to my studio and worked for the rest of the afternoon with the hollow focus of someone whose mind needs an occupation that is not the truth. On an ordinary Tuesday with no particular reason to remember it, I went to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. 6 weeks earlier my GP had referred me. A lump, almost certainly nothing, she had said. Come back in a few weeks. Almost certainly nothing turned out to be something. Early stage breast cancer. Treatable. Good prognosis with prompt action. The consultant was calm and kind in the professional way, the kind of kindness that comes from delivering this news hundreds of times and learning how to hold people steady without holding them too tight. She explained the next steps. Surgery first, then chemotherapy. Monitoring. She gave me a folder of leaflets. She asked if I had someone who could accompany me to the next appointment. I said yes. I sat in the hospital car park for 40 minutes after that. Not crying. Not panicking. Just sitting, watching people move in and out of the entrance on their ordinary Tuesdays, trying to locate the part of my mind that knew how to process what had just happened to me. The consultant's words kept rearranging themselves. Early stage. Good prognosis. Treatable. I was so focused on the words she had said that I almost did not notice the one she had not said. Curable. I drove home. I fed Archie. I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the garden until the light faded completely. Then I picked up my phone. My first instinct, the automatic, unthinking reflex of 12 years, was to call Daniel. That is what marriage does to you. It routes every crisis toward the same person. It makes that person your first call before you have even decided to make a call. 12 years of choosing him had made the choice unconscious. I dialed his number. It rang 5 times. Voicemail. I left a message. I said his name. I said I had been to the hospital. I said I had some news and I needed him to call me back. I said, and I remember this clearly, because it is the last time I said it, I said that I needed him. He called back 3 hours later. There was noise behind him. A restaurant perhaps, or a bar. He asked, in the slightly distracted tone of someone managing 2 conversations, if everything was okay. I said, not really. Can we talk tonight? He said, sure, I will be home by 8. He came home at 10:47. I was already in bed. He did not ask about the hospital. He had forgotten or chosen not to remember, which are not as different as people think. I lay in the dark beside him and listened to him fall asleep, and I made a decision that I have returned to every day since. I was not going to tell him. Not yet. 2 days after the diagnosis, Daniel left his laptop open on the kitchen table. He had gone to shower. The house was quiet. Morning light came through the back window. The coffee was still brewing. I walked past the laptop. I stopped. I want to be honest. I chose to look. It was not an accident or an intrusion. It was a deliberate decision made by a woman who had run out of the luxury of not knowing. After the hotel receipt. After the laugh through the conference room glass. After the 3 hours of silence when I had needed him most. I chose to look. The messages were from Serena. I did not read all of them. I read enough. Enough to understand the length of it, the depth of it, the easy intimacy of people who have been doing something long enough for it to feel ordinary. Enough to understand that this was not recent, and it was not casual. And then I found the message I will never fully forget. Daniel had written, "I don't know how much longer I can do this. She deserves someone who is actually present. I think I stopped loving her a long time ago, and I just kept going through the motions." Serena had written back, "So stop. Just stop. We could actually have a life." I closed the laptop. I poured my coffee. I fed Archie. I made breakfast. When Daniel came downstairs, I handed him a plate. I allowed myself 10 minutes. After Daniel left for work that morning, the automatic kiss on the top of my head, the door closing, the sound of his car pulling away, I sat down at the kitchen table and I let myself feel it. All of it. I did not hold any of it back or manage it or translate it into something more bearable. The grief of it. The specific humiliation of reading your husband describe you to another woman as someone he had stopped loving a long time ago, as though your marriage was a motion he was going through, as though 12 years of your life were an obligation he had been enduring. I felt it completely. For 10 minutes. Then I stood up. This is the part of the story I want you to pay attention to, because it matters more than any of the confrontations or revelations that come later. The decision I made at that kitchen table that morning to feel the truth fully and then act on it clearly was the decision that changed everything. I did not fall apart. I did not confront him from a place of raw, open pain that he could manage or deflect or talk his way around. I took the devastation and I converted it into something he would not recognize until it was far too late. I converted it into patience. I converted it into strategy. I converted it into 30 days of complete and total silence. About a week after I confirmed everything through the laptop, I came home early from a client consultation that had been cut short. I pulled onto our street and saw Diane's car in the driveway. Diane had been my closest friend for 15 years. We met at a pottery class we both abandoned within 3 weeks. She had been at my wedding. She had held my hand through 2 quiet, early losses that Daniel and I had grieved privately and moved past privately, the way couples sometimes do with pain that feels too fragile to share widely. She had sat with me through the hard years of marriage, the distant years, the years where I had wondered if we had made a mistake. She had a key to my house. She had always had a key. I walked up toward the front door. The kitchen window was open at the bottom the way I always left it in the mornings. I heard voices. Daniel's voice. And Diane's voice. The rational part of me said, "This is nothing. They are friends too." But I had learned by then to trust the other part of me. I stopped on my own front path. I took out my phone. I pressed record before I opened the gate. I stood in the afternoon light outside my own home, and I listened to 2 people I had trusted with the most private parts of my life discuss how best to remove me from it. Diane was talking about timing, about the house, about the joint accounts, about making sure the finances were properly structured before Daniel made any move. She was calm and practical, using the same methodical competence she had always brought to helping me with anything that mattered. I had always loved that about her. I stood on my front path and listened to her apply it to the project of ending my marriage. And then she said the words that stopped everything. She said, "She does not know yet, does she? About the baby?" A pause. Daniel said, "No. And I need to figure out how to tell her everything at once." The baby. Serena was pregnant. My husband was not simply leaving me for another woman. He was leaving me for a family, for a future already in formation, already growing, already real in the most biological and irreversible way a future can be. I stood on my path and I learned all of this in one sentence. The recording kept running. I did not move until the voices went quiet and I heard movement inside the kitchen. Then I walked back to my car. I got in. I saved the recording in 3 separate places: my phone, my email, a cloud folder I had created specifically for this purpose in the days since I found the laptop open. I sat for a moment. Then I took out my phone and called my oncologist's office. I scheduled the start of my chemotherapy. I want to tell you something about those 30 days. The 30 days between the path outside my house and the dinner table where I finally spoke. People assume silence under those circumstances is passive. That staying, continuing to cook dinner, to ask how his day was, to sleep beside him in the dark, means you are enduring something. Surviving it. Waiting for it to be over. That is not what I was doing. I was building. Every morning I woke up and went to treatment and came home and was his wife, and in the hours between those things I was systematically and methodically constructing everything I would need. I met with my attorney, Clara, who was sharp and direct and did not waste a single word. I gave her the recording. I gave her the photograph of the hotel receipt. I gave her access to the financial records I was legally entitled to from our joint accounts. And Clara found things I had not found myself. Over 18 months, Daniel had been processing personal expenses through our joint design consulting account. Hotel rooms. Gifts. The deposit on an apartment he and Serena were planning to move into. My business account. My name. My 15 years of client relationships used as a vehicle to fund his escape. The total was just over £40,000. I sat in Clara's office and looked at the number and felt something settle in me like cold water. I told Priya everything on a Wednesday evening. I called her from my car, parked outside my own house, because the house no longer felt like a safe place to say true things. I told her in order: the diagnosis, the receipt, the laptop, the conference room laugh, the path outside my house, the recording, the pregnancy, the chemotherapy that had started 3 days earlier. I told her all of it in one continuous voice, flat and steady, and when I finished there was a silence on the line. Then Priya said 4 words. Tell me what you need. Not, I cannot believe this. Not, are you certain? Not, what are you going to do? Just, tell me what you need, and I will do it. In 12 years of marriage, I had never once heard Daniel say anything that simple or that complete. I told her I needed a witness. Someone who knew the full truth, who could not be managed or persuaded or reframed by Daniel if things became difficult. Someone whose loyalty was entirely mine. She said, "You have always had that. You just forgot to use it." She was right. I had spent so long routing everything through Daniel that I had forgotten the people who had been there before him and would be there after. I drove inside. I made dinner. I asked Daniel about his day. He told me. I listened. I was warm and present and entirely, devastatingly invisible. Chemotherapy started on a Thursday. I had told Daniel about the cancer the Monday before, sitting him down at the kitchen table, watching his face move through shock, then guilt, then the brief, unmistakable flicker of calculation that told me everything I already knew. He asked why I had not told him sooner. I said I needed time to process it myself. He held my hand across the table. His hand was warm and familiar, and felt like the ghost of something. Priya drove me to my first session. I sat in a reclining chair in a ward with 8 other people and had chemicals fed into my bloodstream for 3.5 hours. The nurse who managed my line had warm hands and a very dry sense of humor, and I liked her immediately. She asked if I had family support. I said yes. She looked at me with the particular perception of someone who has sat beside a lot of people in difficult circumstances and can tell the difference between fine and performing fine. She did not push it. I came home that afternoon feeling flattened and strange. Daniel had sent a message saying he would be home late. I made toast, fed Archie, lay on the sofa under a blanket, and watched something on television that I could not have described the next morning. He came home at 11. He said I looked pale. I said I was tired. He went to bed. I lay in the dark and thought about the 40,000 pounds. The 30 days were not only about building a legal case. They were about something harder and more private than that. They were about becoming certain. Not certain of the facts. I had been certain of the facts for weeks. Certain in myself. Certain that what I was about to do was not the reaction of a woman who was hurt and frightened and not thinking clearly. Certain that when I finally spoke, every word would be measured and deliberate and impossible to dismiss. Women who act from visible pain get managed. Their grief becomes the subject of the conversation. Are you okay? Are you thinking straight? Are you sure? Until somehow the thing that was done to them becomes less important than how they are responding to it. I had watched this happen to other women. I had sat in rooms where a woman's tears became the problem that needed addressing rather than the behavior that caused them. I was not going to give anyone that opportunity. So I went to treatment twice a week and came home tired and sat at the kitchen table doing the work that mattered. I read every document Clara sent me. I annotated everything. I asked questions until I understood every option available to me and what each one would cost and what each one would return. By day 28, I was ready. I just needed 2 more days to arrange one final thing. I needed to invite Daniel to dinner. I cooked on a Saturday evening. A real dinner, the kind I used to make when we had something worth celebrating. Lamb that needed 3 hours. A salad built with actual care. The good plates, the ones we kept at the back of the cupboard for occasions. I set the table properly. Candles, the expensive ones Daniel always said we should save for something special. He came home to find the kitchen warm and fragrant and the table laid, and I watched the discomfort move across his face before he assembled something that looked like pleasure. He said it looked wonderful. He asked if it was a special occasion. I said, in a way, come and sit down. We ate. I asked about his week. He talked. I listened the full, generous, unhurried listening I had given him for 12 years, the kind that made people feel both seen and safe. I watched him relax into it. The guilt softening under the familiar comfort of being fed and asked after and made to feel at home. This was the last gift I would ever give him. I was aware of that as I gave it. I let him have one final evening of the marriage at its best, warm, attentive, entirely his, because what came next would be the last time he ever sat at that table. And I wanted the contrast to be complete. When the plates were cleared and the candle had burned down an inch, I put my hands flat on the table and looked at him directly. I said, I know about Serena. He went very still. The stillness of someone who has just heard an alarm they were not expecting, but had always known might sound. I said, I know about the baby. I know that you asked Diane to help you plan your exit. I know about the hotel 2 hours away. I found the receipt in your jacket pocket 3 weeks ago. I know about the messages you wrote to her, including the one where you told her you had stopped loving me a long time ago. I paused and let all of that settle. Then I said, I also want you to know that I have had cancer this entire time. I was diagnosed 6 weeks before I told you. I started chemotherapy 10 days ago. I have been sitting across from you at this table, sleeping beside you in that bed, going to treatment and coming home and cooking your dinner and asking about your day, while you were planning to leave me for a woman who is carrying your child. I watched his face. There was no version of this he had prepared for. He opened his mouth. I raised one hand very slightly. I said, I am not finished. I said, I also want you to know that I recorded the conversation you had with Diane in this kitchen. I have her voice and yours discussing the baby, the timing, and the finances recorded while I was processing a cancer diagnosis alone in a hospital car park. I have given a copy of that recording to my attorney. I have given a copy to your HR department at work because some of what was discussed involved the joint business account you used to process personal expenses over the past 18 months, which forms the basis of the financial fraud claim my attorney filed this morning. He stared at me. And I have given a copy to your mother. The silence that followed was the most complete I have ever heard inside a room. He said my name. He said he could explain. He said for everything we had shared, for every year, For what we once were to each other, please. I stood up. I walked to the hallway. His bag was by the front door. I had packed it that afternoon, neatly, practically, everything he needed for a week. Not out of love. Out of the certainty that I did not want him in my home one moment longer than necessary, and that giving him a bag meant there would be no reason to come back tomorrow. He took it. He stood in the doorway. I said, "Your mother called me an hour ago." She cried. She asked what she could do. I told her nothing. This is already done. The door closed. I went back to the kitchen. I blew out the expensive candles, the ones we had been saving for something special. I washed the good plates. I dried them and put them back in the cupboard. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, and Archie came and put his head in my lap, and I held on to him for a long time. I did not feel triumphant. I want to tell you that clearly because I think people expect a moment like that to feel like victory, and it did not. It felt like the end of something enormous, not just the marriage, but the version of myself who had been so devoted to it. The woman who had spent 12 years making herself smaller so he could feel larger. The woman who routed every crisis toward the same person and called it love. That woman was gone. She had been leaving slowly for 30 days. And now she was entirely gone. What remained was someone quieter and sharper and more her own. Someone who had sat through chemotherapy in the mornings and built a legal case in the afternoons and made lamb with rosemary on a Saturday evening and delivered the most important speech of her life with her hands flat and her voice steady. I was, for the first time in longer than I could remember, completely and entirely myself. The financial audit Clara had initiated returned its findings within 2 weeks. £42,000. Hotel rooms, dinners, gifts, and the full deposit on the apartment Daniel and Serena had been planning to move into together, all of it run through my business account. My name, my 15 years of client trust and professional reputation, used as a mechanism to fund the life he was building without me. His firm was notified. External auditors do not have discretion around financial irregularities of that scale. He was placed on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. The man who had planned his exit with such meticulous care had not been meticulous about the money. Arrogance does that. It guards the doors it thinks matter and leaves others standing open. He had focused so completely on managing me that he forgot to manage the numbers. Clara was thorough. The settlement that followed returned every misappropriated pound, plus damages. The apartment deposit came back. The dinners came back. The hotel rooms came back, every single one. I sat in Clara's office when it was finalized and looked at the final number and thought about the studio I had always wanted to open properly. A real space, a small team, my name above the door in clean letters. The business I had been building toward for years, perpetually postponed by some combination of caution and compromise. The money made it possible. He funded my next chapter without meaning to. I need to tell you about Diane. She called 4 times in the week after that Saturday dinner. I did not answer. On the 5th call, I picked up. I let her speak. She said she was sorry. She said she had not known how to choose. She said Daniel had told her I was already withdrawing from the marriage, that I was not really present, that she was helping us both by helping him plan something less damaging than a sudden, ugly confrontation. She said this in the warm, reasonable, compassionate tone she had always used when she was certain she was right about something. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I said, "I want you to know that I forgive you. Not because what you did was forgivable, but because carrying it would cost me more than you are worth. And I want you to know that I played this recording to your husband last night." I did not specify which recording. The pause on the line told me she understood. I hung up. I have not spoken to her since. I do not intend to. I want to say something about forgiveness, because I think it is widely misunderstood. Forgiving someone is not the same as offering them continued access to your life. It is not reconciliation or resolution or an invitation back. It is simply the act of refusing to carry something heavy on someone else's behalf. I put it down. That is all. About 2 weeks after Daniel left, Serena called me. I want you to understand how unexpected that was. And I want you to be honest with yourself, the way I had to be honest with myself, about what you would have expected from me in that moment. She did not call to apologize or to argue. She called because Daniel had given her the same thing he had given me, reassurances. Trust me, I will handle it. It will all work out. And she had recently discovered the financial investigation. She had discovered that her apartment deposit, money she believed was legitimately his, was part of the flagged funds. She was 4 months pregnant, connected to a fraud inquiry, and the man who had promised her everything was not answering his phone. She was alone. She was frightened. She called me. I let her speak until she was finished. And then I said, I am not your enemy. I was never your enemy. What I can tell you is that the version of Daniel you fell in love with is the same performance I married. That man is not real. I am sorry you are finding this out the way I did, alone and too late. I gave her Clara's name and number. Not for my case. For hers. Because she was pregnant and frightened and needed someone standing in her corner, and that was true regardless of everything else. I hung up. Archie put his head in my lap. Daniel's mother sent flowers 3 weeks after the dinner. They arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, heavy and fragrant, the kind that fill a room immediately. The card was small and handwritten in her careful, slightly slanted script. It said, "You deserved better. I am sorry we did not see it sooner." I stood in my hallway and read it twice. Then I put the flowers in the center of my newly redecorated living room. I had repainted the week before, a warm white that I had been wanting for years, the color I had been outvoted on a decade earlier. And I kept the card in the drawer where I keep things that matter. I thought about her a great deal in the weeks that followed. About what it costs a mother to write a card like that. To choose truth over loyalty to her child. To name what happened clearly and without qualification and send it, in her careful handwriting, to the woman her son had betrayed. It cost her something. I understood that. And because it cost her something, it meant something. The chemotherapy continued. My consultant used the word responding at every appointment. Then she used the word well. Then she used the phrase very well indeed, in the slightly restrained tone of a professional who does not want to overpromise, but cannot quite contain the good news. I was, it turned out, going to be fine. In every sense of that word. My studio opened 4 months after the divorce was finalized. A real space, not the rented room I had outgrown. High ceilings, good light, a small team of 2 people I had been wanting to work with properly for years. My name on the door in clean black letters, the kind you see from the street. Priya came to the opening. She stood in the middle of the main room, looked up at the ceiling, then looked at me, and smiled in the particular way she has that requires no words. I thought about the Saturday dinner. About the laptop message. About the hospital car park. About standing on my front path pressing record on my phone. About 30 days of silence that were never passive, never helpless, never without direction. I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of all of it, the one who lay in the dark beside a man she loved and told herself the phone face down on the counter meant nothing. I did not feel contempt for her. She had loved as fully as she knew how. She had built a real life with the materials available to her and the understanding she had at the time. But she was not who I was anymore. Who I was now was someone who had walked through the worst year of her life with cancer in her body and a lie in her bed, and had emerged from it not diminished but sharpened. Not quieter but more deliberately, purposefully, precisely loud. The name above the door was mine. I want to tell you what I learned. Not about men or marriage or betrayal. There are enough stories about those things. I want to tell you what I learned about myself. I learned that I am capable of more composure under pressure than I ever knew, because I had never needed to find it before. I learned that silence is not the same as weakness. Sometimes silence is the most strategic thing you own. I learned that the most dangerous thing a woman can do is love someone more than she loves herself. Not because love is wrong, but because that imbalance makes you invisible, even to yourself. You stop taking up space. You stop asking for what you need. You start measuring your worth by whether the other person is comfortable. I had cancer and a husband who was leaving and a best friend who chose him, and I sat through chemotherapy and built a legal case and cooked a 3-hour dinner and delivered the truth with my hands flat on the table and my voice completely steady. Not because I am exceptional, because I finally stopped waiting for someone else to decide I was worth fighting for and decided it myself. My treatment ended. My prognosis is excellent. My name is above my own door. Archie still steals one shoe at a time, which is its own kind of constancy. And somewhere across the city, the people who thought they were managing my life are managing the consequences of that decision. I do not celebrate that. But I do not apologize for it either. You do not need a diagnosis to start choosing yourself. You just need one honest moment in a car park, a hospital ward, a quiet kitchen, where you finally say, I deserve the same loyalty I have been giving. Say it. Everything starts there.